To Mr. Joseph Baretti at Milan, London, December 21st, 1762. Sir, you are not to suppose, with all your conviction of my idleness, that I have passed all this time without writing to my Baretti. I gave a letter to Mr. Beauclerk, who, in my opinion, and in his own, was hastening to Naples for the recovery of his health. But he has stopped at Paris, and I know not when he will proceed. Langton is with him. I will not trouble you with speculation about peace and war. The good or ill success of battles and embassies extends itself to a very small part of domestic life. We all have good and evil, which we feel more sensibly than our petty part of public miscarriage or prosperity. I am sorry for your disappointment, with which you seem more touched than I should expect a man of your resolution and experience to have been, did I not know that general truths are seldom applied to particular occasions. Let me read that again. I am sorry for your disappointment, with which you seem more touched than I should expect a man of your resolution and experience to have been, did I not know that general truths are seldom applied to particular occasions, and that the fallacy of our self-love extends itself as wide as our interest or affections. Every man believes that mistresses are unfaithful and patrons capricious, but he expects his own mistress and his own patron. He accepts his own mistress and his own patron. We have all learned that greatness is negligent and contemptuous, and that in courts life is often languished away in ungratified expectation. But he that approaches greatness or glitters in a court imagines that destiny has at last exempted him from the common lot. Do not let such evils overwhelm you, as thousands have suffered and thousands have surmounted. But turn your thoughts with vigor to some other plan of life, and keep always in your mind that, with due submission to Providence, a man of genius has been seldom ruined but by himself. Your patron's weakness of insensibility will finally do you little hurt, if he is not assisted by your own passions. Of your love I know not the propriety, nor can estimate the power. But in love, as in every other passion, of which hope is the essence, we ought always to remember the uncertainty of events. There is indeed nothing that so much seduces reason from vigilance as the thought of passing life with an amiable woman. And if all would happen that a lover fancies, I know not what other terrestrial happiness would deserve pursuit. But love and marriage are different states. Those who are to suffer the evils together, and to suffer often for the sake of one another, soon lose that tenderness of look and that benevolence of mind which arose from the participation of unmingled pleasure and successive amusement. A woman, we are sure, will not be always fair. We are not sure she will always be virtuous, and man cannot retain through life that respect and assiduity by which he pleases for a day or for a month. I do not, however, pretend to have discovered that life has anything more to be desired than a prudent and vigorous marriage. Therefore, know not what counsel to give you. If you can quit your imagination of love and greatness, and leave your hopes of preferment and bridal raptures to try once more the fortune of literature and industry, the way through France is now open. We flatter ourselves that we shall cultivate with great diligence the arts of peace, and every man will be welcome among us who can teach us anything we do not know. For your part, you will find all your old friends willing to receive you. Reynolds still continues to increase in reputation and in riches. Miss Williams, who very much loves you, goes on in the old way. Miss Cotterell is still with Mrs. Porter. Miss Charlotte is married to Dean Lewis and has 3 children. Mr. Levitt has married a streetwalker. But the Gazette of my narration must not arrive to tell you that Bathurst went physician to the army and died at the Havana. Oh, but the Gazette of my narration must now arrive to tell you, not arrive to tell you. Whoops. I know not whether I have not sent you word that Huggins and Richardson are both dead. I believe last time we did mention that Richardson was dead. When we see our enemies and friends gliding away before us, let us not forget that we are subject to the general laws of mortality, and shall soon be where our doom will be fixed forever. I pray God to bless you, and am, dear sir, your most affectionate, humble servant, Sam Johnson. Write soon. Now we're up to 1763. The years are just breezing by. This is when Johnson was 54. In 1763, he furnished to the poetical calendar published by Fawkes and Walty a character of Collins, which he afterwards engrafted into his entire life of that admirable poet, in the collection of lives which he wrote for the body of English poetry, formed and published by the booksellers of London. His account of the melancholy depression with which Collins was severely afflicted, and which brought him to his grave, is, I think, one of the most tender and interesting passages in the whole series of his writings. He also favored Mr. Hoole with the dedication of his translation of Tasso to the Queen, which is so happily conceived and elegantly expressed that I cannot but point it out to the peculiar notice of my readers. Quoted part here from somebody. I don't know, it's a footnote. Madame, to approach the high and the illustrious has been in all ages the privilege of poets, and though translators cannot justly claim the same honor, yet they naturally follow their authors as attendants. And I hope that in return for having enabled Tasso to diffuse his fame through your British dominions, I may be introduced by him to the presence of your Majesty. Tasso has a peculiar claim to your Majesty's favors as follower and panegyrist of the House of Este, which has one common ancestor with the House of Hanover. And in reviewing his life, it is not easy to forbear a wish that he has lived in a happier time, when he might, among the descendants of that illustrious family, have found a more liberal and potent patronage. I cannot but observe, Madame, how you unequally reward in this proportion to merit, when I reflect that the happiness which was withheld from Tasso is reserved for me, and that the poem which one hardly procured to its author, The Countenance of the Prince of Ferrara, has attracted to its translator the favorable notice of a British queen. Had this been the fate of Tasso, he would have been able to have celebrated the condescension of your Majesty in nobler language, but could not have felt it with more ardent gratitude than Madame, your Majesty's most faithful and devoted servant. So that sounds like that was quoted from Johnson. Maybe that's from the dedication, or maybe that is the dedication he wrote for Mr. Hoole's translation of Tasso to the Queen, I'm guessing. To back to Boswell. This is to me a memorable year, for in it I have the happiness to obtain the acquaintance of that extraordinary man, whose memoirs I am now writing. Oh boy! So this is the year Boswell met Johnson. Exciting. An acquaintance which I shall ever esteem as one of the most fortunate circumstances in my life. Though then but 22, I had for several years read his works with delight and instruction, and had the highest reverence for their author, which had grown up in my fancy into a kind of mysterious veneration, by figuring to myself a state of solemn elevated abstraction, in which I supposed him to live in the immense metropolis of London. Mr. Gentleman, a native of Ireland, who passed some years in Scotland as a player, and as an instructor in the English language, a man whose talents and worth were depressed by misfortunes, had given me a representation of the figure and manner of Dictionary Johnson, as he was then generally called. And during my first visit to London, which was for 3 months in 1760, Mr. Derrick, the poet, who was Gentleman's friend and countryman, flattered me with hopes that he would introduce me to Johnson, in honor of which I was very ambitious. But he never found an opportunity, which made me doubt that he had promised to do what was not in his power. Till Johnson, some years afterwards, told me, "Derrick, sir, might very well have introduced you. I had a kindness for Derrick, and am sorry he is dead." Footnote here about Dictionary Johnson, that term. As great men of antiquity, such as Scipio Africanus, had an epithet added to their names in consequence of some celebrated action, so my illustrious friend was often called Dictionary Johnson, from that wonderful achievement of genius and labor, his Dictionary of the English Language, the merit of which I contemplate with more and more admiration. Boswell. In like manner, we have Hermes Harris, Pliny Melmoth, Desmotheus Taylor, Persian Jones, Abyssinian Bruce, Microscope Baker, Leodonis Glover, Hesiod Cook, and of course, Corsica Boswell. In the summer of 1761, Mr. Thomas Sheridan was in Edinburgh and delivered lectures upon the English language and public speakings to large and respectable audiences. I was often in his company and heard him frequently expatiate upon Johnson's extraordinary knowledge, talents, and virtues, repeat his pointed sayings, describe his particularities, and boast of his being his guest sometimes till 2 or 3 in the morning. At his house I hope to have many opportunities of seeing the sage, as Mr. Sheridan obligingly assured me I should not be disappointed. When I returned to London in the end of 1762, to my surprise and regret I found an irreconcilable difference had taken place between Johnson and Sheridan. A pension of £200 a year had been given to Sheridan. Johnson, who, as has been already mentioned, thought slightly of Sheridan's art, upon hearing that he was also pensioned, exclaimed, "What? Have they given him a pension? Then it is time for me to give up mine." Wow. So who said that? Johnson about Sheridan or Sheridan about Johnson? I gotta read this again. So that was Johnson talking about Sheridan also getting a pension, I think. Whether this proceeded from a momentary indignation, as if it were an affront to his exalted merit that a player should be rewarded in the same manner with him, again, Johnson hates actors, or was the sudden effect of a fit of peevishness, it was unluckily said, and indeed cannot be justified. Mr. Sheridan's pension was granted to him not as a player, but as a sufferer in the cause of government, when he was manager of the Theatre Royal in Ireland, when parties ran high in 1753. And it must also be allowed that he was a man of literature and had considerably improved the arts of reading and speaking with distinctness and propriety. I love that word propriety back then. Never comes up these days. Besides, Johnson should have recollected that Mr. Sheridan taught pronunciation to Mr. Alexander Wedderburn, whose sister was married to Sir Harry Erskine, an intimate friend of Lord Bute, who was the favorite of the king. I could use one of those pronunciation classes, I think. And surely the most outrageous Whig will not maintain that whatever ought to be the principle of the disposal of offices A pension ought never to be granted from any bias of court connection. Yeah. Mr. Macklin, indeed, shared with Mr. Sheridan the honor of instructing Mr. Wendenborn, and though it was too late in life for a Caledonian to acquire the genuine English cadence, yet so successful were Mr. Wendenborn's instructors and his own unabating endeavors that he got rid of the coarse part of his Scotch accent, retaining only as much of the nature wood note wild as to mark his country. Native wood note wild, which, if any Scotchman should affect to forget, I should heartily despise him. Notwithstanding the difficulties which are to be encountered by those who have not had the advantage of an English education, he by degrees formed a mode of speaking to which Englishmen do not deny the praise of elegance. Hence his distinguished oratory, which he exerted in his own country as an advocate of the Court of Session, and a ruling elder of the Kirk, has had its fame and ample reward in much higher spheres. When I look back on this noble person at Edinburgh in situations so unworthy of his brilliant powers, and behold Lord Loughborough at London, the change seems almost like one of the Metamorphoses in Ovid. And as his two preceptors, by refining his utterances, gave currency to his talents, we may say in the words of that poet, Nam vos mutastis, which I believe means, you transformed him, from Milan. From the Metamorphoses, rather. Okay, so this guy learned how to speak because of Mr. Sheridan. Wonderful. He doesn't have that Scottish. I was going to do a Scottish accent, but forget about it. He lost his Scottish. It doesn't sound like Scotty anymore. I have dwelt the longer upon this remarkable instance of successful parts in assiduity, because of it affords animating encouragement to other gentlemen of North Britain to try their fortunes in the southern part of the island, where they may hope to gratify their utmost ambition. And now that we are one people by the Union, it would surely be illiberal to maintain that they have not an equal title with the natives of any other part of His Majesty's dominions. What a toady, huh? Johnson complained that a man, James Macpherson, according to Boswell's papers, here's a later footnote, who disliked him, repeated his sarcasm to Mr. Sheridan, without telling him what followed, which was that after a pause he added, however, I am glad that Mr. Sheridan had a pension, for he's a very good man. Okay, sure. Sheridan could never forgive this hasty, contemptuous expression. It rankled in his mind, and though I informed him of all that Johnson said, and that he would be very glad to meet him amicably, he positively declined repeated offers which I made, and once went off abruptly from a house where he and I were engaged to dine because he was told that Dr. Johnson was to be there. I thought Sheridan died. Am I getting names confused? Oh, Richardson died, not Sheridan. I got them confused. I have no sympathetic feeling with such preserving resentment. It is painful when there is a breach between those who have lived together socially and cordially, and I wonder that there is not, in all such cases, a mutual wish that it should be healed. I could perceive that Mr. Sheridan was by no means satisfied with Johnson's acknowledging him to be a good man. That could not soothe his injured vanity. I could not but smile at the same time that I was offended to observe Sheridan in the Life of Swift, which he afterwards published, attempting, in the writings of his resentment, to depreciate Johnson by characterizing him as a writer of gigantic fame in those days of little men. That very Johnson whom he once so highly admired and venerated. And I'll conclude today with a very long footnote. Oh no, not a very long footnote. Never mind. Okay, I'm all done then. The long footnote goes for the next section, which I will do tomorrow. Till then, bye from Boswell.